The morning sun rises over the mist-shrouded peaks, piercing the dense canopy to reveal a world that feels older than time itself. It is 800 BC in the high, rugged ridges of Mount Lebanon, within the borders of modern-day Lebanon. A sharp, rhythmic ringing echoes through the valley, the sound of bronze axes striking ancient bark. High above the cloud line, men with weathered skin and calloused hands are engaged in a battle of endurance against the giants of the earth. There is no roar of engines here, no screech of industrial machinery to break the stillness of the mountain air. There is only the synchronized grunt of labor, the creak of straining wood, and the heavy thud of timber hitting the forest floor. This is not merely a job, it is a sacred duty, a commerce that binds the fates of empires. To stand here is to witness the sheer physical cost of civilization. We often look at the ruins of great palaces and temples admiring the stone, yet we rarely consider the vanished timber that held them up or the human sweat poured into the soil to harvest it. How did a small strip of coastal land, hemmed in by mountains and sea, manage to supply the wooden spine of the ancient world? And what drove these mountain people to drag immense logs down perilous slopes to the waiting waves below? The story of the Phoenicians begins not on the water, but here, in the shadows of the Cedrus Libani, the Cedars of Lebanon. These are not ordinary trees. In the ancient mind, they are the residents of gods, pillars of the sky that grow to heights of over 100 feet. Their trunks are so thick that 3 men linking hands can barely encircle them. The air here is heavy, almost intoxicating, filled with the sharp, spicy aroma of cedar resin, a scent that the ancients believed was the perfume of eternity. For the people of the coast, whom the Greeks will later call Phoenicians, but who call themselves Canaanites or Sidonians, these forests are their greatest treasure. The geography of their homeland is a paradox. They possess little flat land for farming, squeezed as they are between the mountain ranges and the Mediterranean Sea. But they own the mountains, and the mountains own the trees. The work of felling a single giant is a slow, methodical dance. It requires patience that the modern mind might find maddening. A team of woodcutters works in rotation, chipping away at the base of a tree that has stood for 1,000 years. It is dangerous work. A miscalculation in the angle of the cut could send tons of wood crashing down on the workers. Yet there is a rhythm to it, a respect for the life being taken. Nearby, in the temporary seasonal camps established just below the timberline, the other half of this society works with equal diligence. History often focuses on the men with the axes, but the survival of these high-altitude operations relies entirely on the women who sustain them. They are the silent architects of the camp's stability. In the thin, cold mountain air, they maintain the fires that must never go out, weaving heavy woolens to protect families from the biting frost. They process the game hunted in the valleys, preserving meat with salt brought up from the coast, and grind hard grains into meal. Without their logistical mastery, managing supplies that must last for weeks of isolation, the harvest of the cedar would be impossible. They are the keepers of the hearth in a wilderness that is hostile to human life, ensuring that when the exhausting day is done, there is warmth and order waiting. Once a tree is felled, the true struggle begins. Gravity is both an enemy and a friend. The logs must be stripped of their branches, which are gathered for charcoal or smaller crafts. Then the massive trunks are lashed to sledges. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians constructed elaborate paved slipways, dry stone chutes lubricated with oil or animal fat to slide the logs downhill, or if they waited for the spring thaws to float the timber down the swollen riverbeds. The debate remains unsettled, largely because the landscape has changed so much over 3,000 years. However, the sheer weight of a prime cedar log suggests that water transport would have been the only feasible method for the longest journeys. Imagine the scene during the spring melt, the roar of the river, the shouting of men guiding these dark wooden leviathans through the white water, steering them toward the sea. Their destination is Byblos. Known locally as Gubal, this is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. As the logs arrive at the river's mouth, the quiet isolation of the mountains is replaced by the chaotic energy of a booming international port. Byblos is the funnel through which the wealth of the mountains flows out to the world. The air here does not smell of pine and snow, it smells of salt, drying fish, and the sweat of 1,000 stevedores. The harbour of Byblos is a hive of commerce. Here, the cedar logs are not just wood, they are currency. The most hungry customer lies to the south, Egypt. The pharaohs, ruling over a land of sand and palm trees, are desperate for this timber. Their native trees are too soft, too twisted to support the roofs of Karnak or the funeral barges of the Nile. They need the straight, rot-resistant strength of the Lebanon cedar. In exchange for this wood of life, Egypt sends gold, linen, and papyrus. It is a trade relationship that has already existed for centuries, creating a bond of dependency between the Nile and the Levantine coast. There is a fascinating, slightly macabre detail about this trade that is often overlooked. The Egyptians value the cedar not only for its strength but for its blood, the resin. This sticky, aromatic sap is extracted and shipped in amphorae to the embalming houses of Thebes and Memphis. It is a key ingredient in the mummification process. The ancients discovered that the same chemical properties that keep the cedar tree from rotting in the forest can also preserve the human body for the afterlife. Thus, the essence of the Lebanese mountains ends up entombed in the pyramids, protecting the pharaohs on their journey to the field of reeds. Walking through the streets of Byblos in this era, one would see the prosperity this trade brings. The houses are well built, often of stone, with flat roofs where families sleep on hot summer nights. The marketplace is a swirl of languages, Akkadian, Egyptian, early Aramaic. But despite this wealth, the people of Byblos and their sister cities, Tyre and Sidon, live in a state of constant vulnerability. They are a small people surrounded by wolves. To the east lie the great military empires of Assyria and later Babylon, hungry giants who view the coastal cities not as partners, but as vassals to be taxed. The Phoenicians cannot hope to defeat these armies on the open field. They do not have the manpower for vast legions. Instead, they choose a different path. They choose the sea. The cedar that they harvest is not only for export. In the shipyards of Byblos, the finest logs are kept for a different purpose. Here, master carpenters are beginning to experiment, pushing the boundaries of what a boat can be. They are realizing that this wood, which is light, durable, and resistant to the warping effects of salt water, allows them to build something unprecedented. They are moving away from the flat-bottomed barges that hug the riverbanks. They are dreaming of deep hulls and high prows. They are looking at the horizon, where the blue of the sea meets the blue of the sky, and seeing not a barrier but a road. The mountains gave them the material, but the pressure of the land empires gave them the motivation. If they cannot expand east into the swords of Assyria, they will expand west into the unknown. The loggers high on the slopes of Mount Lebanon, shivering in the morning mist, are unknowingly cutting the keys that will unlock the Mediterranean. But having the wood is one thing. Shaping it into a vessel that can survive the unpredictable violence of the open ocean is another challenge entirely. How did these early craftsmen, working with simple bronze tools, engineer a ship capable of leaving the sight of land? The journey of the cedar log does not end at the river mouth. In fact, its true purpose is only just beginning. We move now from the raw chaos of the timber drive to the disciplined symphony of the shipyard. It is here, on the sandy foreshores of Tyre and Sidon, that the Phoenicians perform their greatest alchemy. They take the wild, heavy wood of the mountains and teach it to fly across the water. Walk into a Phoenician shipyard in the 8th century BC, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. It is a pungent, heavy cocktail of hot pine resin, boiling pitch, and the salty decay of the harbour mud. The air is filled with a cacophony of percussion, bronze adzes chipping away at wood, mallets driving pegs, and the rhythmic chanting of workers hauling planks. This is the laboratory of the Iron Age, where the boundaries of physics are being tested daily. The object of all this labour sits in the centre of the yard, rising like the skeleton of a beached whale. It is the goloi, or round ship. To modernise, accustomed to sleek steel liners or fiberglass yachts, this vessel might look tubby and awkward. It is wide-beamed and curved, resembling a walnut shell more than a dart. But this shape is intentional. The Phoenicians are not building for speed, they are building for profit. The Gaulois is designed to maximise cargo space and stability. It is the workhorse of the Mediterranean, a floating warehouse capable of carrying precious metals, wine, oil and grain through the roughest swells. At the very bottom of this structure lies the single most important innovation in maritime history, the keel. Before this era, many boats were essentially sophisticated rafts or baskets, flat-bottomed vessels that drifted with the current or required immense effort to steer. They sat on the water. The Phoenician shipwrights, however, lay down a massive single beam of straight cedar, the spine of the ship, which cuts into the water. This keel gives the vessel structural integrity and, crucially, directional stability. It allows the ship to bite into the sea, resisting the wind's attempt to push it sideways. It transforms the boat from a drifting leaf into a guided missile. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians invented the keel entirely on their own, or if they adapted the concept from the mysterious sea peoples or earlier Mycenaean designs. Yet archaeological consensus leans toward the idea that the Phoenicians perfected it, turning it into the standard for all future naval architecture. Building up from this spine requires a technique that baffles the modern mind, which is used to internal frames and skeletons. The Phoenicians build shell first. They construct the outer skin of the ship before inserting the internal ribs. It is a feat of cabinetry on a massive scale. Watch the master carpenter at work. He does not use iron nails to hold the hull planks together. Iron rusts and snaps in the twisting heave of the ocean. Instead, he uses a method called mortise and tenon. He cuts a rectangular slot into the edge of one plank and a matching slot in the next. A flat wooden tongue, the tenon, is inserted to bridge them and then locked in place with a wooden peg. Here is the genius of the design, the hidden logic that keeps these sailors alive. The system relies on the water itself. As the sea soaks into the wood, the cedar planks and the wooden pegs swell. This expansion tightens the joints, sealing the hull and making the ship stronger the longer it stays wet. The ocean, usually the enemy of the sailor, is manipulated to become the glue that holds his ship together. While the men labour over the heavy timbers, the shipyard is also a domain of female industry, specifically regarding the ship's engine, the sail. In the open courtyards nearby, women oversee the massive production of linen required to drive these vessels. This is not delicate embroidery, it is heavy industrial weaving. The women spin the flax and weave the gigantic rectangular sails on vertical looms. The physical demand is immense. Creating a single sail can take months of coordinated labour, but their role goes deeper than just weaving. They are often the ones responsible for the waterproofing mixtures. In large cauldrons, they mix pine pitch and beeswax, a hot, sticky and dangerous substance that must be applied to the ropes and seams. There is a quiet dignity in this division of labour. The men build the body of the ship, the women create the wings that allow it to move, and the sealants that keep it dry. It is a partnership of survival, mirrored in the structure of the vessel itself, strength and flexibility working in tandem. As the hull nears completion, a peculiar ritual takes place. An artist paints two large, staring eyes on the prow of the ship. These are the oculi. To the rational modern mind, this is mere decoration. But to the ancient sailor, venturing into the chaotic waters where monsters and storms reside, the ship is a living entity. It needs eyes to see the route, to spot the hidden shoals and avoid the wrath of the sea gods. It is a touch of humanity added to a machine, a desperate hope that the wood will look out for the men inside it. Finally, the ship is greased with animal fat and slid into the harbour. It sits high in the water, bobbing lightly. It is a triumph of engineering, a vessel capable of sailing to the ends of the known world. But as it floats there, empty and buoyant, it represents a problem. A ship is a hole in the water into which one pours money. Sitting in the harbour, it is useless. To pay for the cedar, the bronze tools, and the months of labour, this vessel must be filled with cargo that is small in size but immense in value. The Phoenicians cannot fill these holds with common grain or stone. The profit margins are too low for the risks of the deep sea. They need a luxury good, something exclusive, something that the kings and queens of the world will covet above all else. They need a product that speaks of power and divinity. Fortunately, just down the coast, along the rocky shorelines of Tyre, nature has provided a small, slimy and utterly unglamorous creature that holds the secret to the greatest fortune the ancient world has ever known. But how does a foul-smelling sea snail transform into the colour of royalty? If you were to travel south from the cedar-scented slopes of Byblos to the island city of Tyre in the 8th century BC, your arrival would be announced not by the sight of its massive walls, but by the wind. Long before the city comes into view, a heavy, cloying odour hits you, a mix of garlic, sulphur and rotting shellfish. To the uninitiated, it is repulsive, a stench that clings to the back of the throat. But to the Phoenician merchant, this is the sweetest perfume in the world. It is the smell of absolute, unrivalled monopoly. We are standing now on the outskirts of Tyre, the beating heart of the Phoenician commercial empire. Here, immense mounds of discarded shells rise like glittering white dunes, monuments to an industrial slaughter on a scale that is hard to comprehend. This is the home of the Tyrian purple, the dye that will clothe the Caesars, the high priests, and the royalty of Europe for 1,000 years. The the source of this imperial luxury is deceptively humble. It does not come from a rare mine or a magical plant, but from a predatory sea snail, the murex. Specifically the Bolinus brandaris and the Hexaplex trunculus. These spiny, medium-sized mollusks prowl the shallow seabeds of the Mediterranean, drilling into other shells to feed. They are ugly, vicious little creatures, yet they harbour a secret within their flesh that is worth more than its weight in gold. The process of extracting this secret is a triumph of chemistry and patience, yet it is grueling, filthy work. It begins with the harvest. Thousands of wicker baskets are baited with rotting fish and lowered into the sea. When they are hauled up, they are teeming with snails. On the shore, the labour is divided with brutal efficiency. For the larger snails, the shell must be carefully broken with a small hammer to expose a tiny vein-like sac behind the head, the hyperbranchial gland. This gland contains a single drop of clear yellowish mucus. It is here that we see the dexterity required of the workforce. While men often haul the heavy baskets, historians believe that the extraction, which requires the precision of a surgeon to avoid piercing the sac and ruining the dye, was likely a task shared by women, whose skilled hands could move with the necessary speed and care. It is a numbers game of staggering proportions. To produce just 1 ounce of dye, enough to colour the trim of a single garment, requires the glands of 12,000 snails. To dye a whole robe of solid purple requires hundreds of thousands of lives. This scarcity is the first part of the hidden logic behind the dye's astronomical price. Once extracted, the glandular fluid is placed in lead vats and subjected to slow controlled heating. Salt is added to prevent rot and the mixture simmers for days. As it cooks, the stench becomes overpowering. In fact, the smell of the dye workshops is so notorious that centuries later, rabbinical texts in the Talmud will grant a woman the right to divorce her husband if he becomes a dyer after they marry, the only profession to carry such a stigma. But then, the magic happens. When the pale, yellowish liquid is applied to wool or silk and exposed to the bright Mediterranean sunlight, a photochemical reaction occurs. The fluid changes colour before the viewer's eyes. It shifts from yellow to green, then to blue, and finally settles into a deep, rich reddish purple. The exact shade can be manipulated by tweaking the cooking time or, as some scholars suggest, by double dyeing the cloth in vats of 2 different snail species. Historians still argue whether the most prized shade was a true violet or something closer to the colour of clotted blood, a deep dark crimson known as porphyra. Whatever the exact hue, its primary value lies not just in its beauty, but in its permanence. In the ancient world, most plant-based dyes fade quickly in the sun and wash out with water. Tyrian purple is different. It is colour-fast. In fact, it does not fade. It actually becomes brighter and more intense with weathering and sunlight. To wear a robe of Tyrian purple is to wear a garment that defies time. It is a subtle message of immortality wrapped around the shoulders of a king. While the purple people, Greek word phoenikes likely refers to this red-purple dye, are famous for the colour, the industry rests entirely on the quality of the canvas. You cannot waste dye worth a fortune on rough, scratchy wool. Here again, the invisible hand of women supports the empire. In the households of Tyre and Sidon, women process the raw wool from the flocks grazing in the hinterlands. They wash, card and spin the fibres into yarn of incredible fineness, creating textiles that feel like water against the skin. Without this high-quality cloth, the dye is useless. The merchant sells the finished product, the purple robe, but he's really selling a symbiotic masterpiece, the chemistry of the dyer married to the artistry of the weaver. This industry creates a cycle of immense wealth. The purple cloth is traded for silver from Spain, tin from Britain, and ivory from Africa. But it also creates a unique social class in Tyre. The dyers, despite the smell, are wealthy artisans. Their hands are permanently stained a deep violet, a badge of their trade that no amount of scrubbing can remove. They walk the streets marked by their work, the creators of the very symbol of power that they themselves are forbidden to wear. The dye trade also shapes the city of Tyre itself. Because of the noxious fumes, the production centres are pushed to the leeward side of the island, the side sheltered from the wind, or to the mainland settlement known as Palais Tyre. The city becomes a place of sharp contrasts, the glittering temples of Melkart and the busy aromatic markets in the centre, flanked by the industrial smoke and stench of the dye works on the periphery. This monopoly on purple gives the Phoenicians a kind of soft power. They do not need to conquer a foreign king if they can sell him the very robe that defines his kingship. They weave themselves into the cultural fabric of their neighbours. the high priest in Jerusalem, the king of Babylon, the pharaoh of Egypt, they all wear the product of Phoenician labour. However, a merchant cannot build an empire on textiles alone. Cloth is light and easy to ship, but the Phoenicians also deal in oils, wines, and precious perfumes. These liquids need containers. Clay pottery is the standard solution, heavy, porous, and prone to breaking. To truly dominate the luxury market, the Phoenicians need a container that matches the elegance of their contents. They need a material that is watertight, smooth, and beautiful. Once again, they turn to the natural elements around them. They look at the endless sandy beaches of their coastline and the hot fires of their kilns, and they wonder, what happens if we melt the earth itself? Leaving the pungent, purple-stained workshops of Tyre, we travel just 25 miles north along the glittering coast to the city of Sidon. If Tyre is the city of kings and cloth, Sidon is the city of fire and sand. Here the sensory experience shifts dramatically. The air is not heavy with the smell of organic decay, but rather dry and acrid, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the metallic tang of superheated minerals. Walking along the banks of the Belus River, near the city's outskirts, the ground beneath your feet seems unremarkable, just endless miles of pale, fine sand. To the casual observer, it is waste, the barren margin between the fertile land and the sea. But the Sidonians see something else. They see the raw potential for a miracle. They understand that this sand, when married to the right catalyst and subjected to the fury of the furnace, can shed its gritty, opaque nature and become something that resembles a gemstone, yet can be moulded like clay. They are about to master the art of glass. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder, writing centuries later, tells a charming story about this discovery. He claims that a group of Phoenician sailors landed on this very beach to cook a meal. Finding no stones to prop up their cooking pots, they used blocks of natron, a natural salt they were transporting from Egypt. As the fire roared beneath the pots, the heat melted the natron, which mixed with the beach sand, and suddenly a stream of transparent liquid flowed out. While modern science tells us that a simple campfire could never reach the temperatures required to melt sand over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the story captures a fundamental chemical truth. The secret to glass is not just the sand silica, but the flux. The Phoenicians discovered that by adding natron or plant ash to the sand, they could lower the melting point significantly, bringing the impossible within the reach of human technology. In the workshops of Sidon during this period, 800 to 300 BC, the glassblower's pipe has not yet been invented. That revolution is still centuries away. The artisans of this era are working with a technique that is far more laborious and sculptural, known as core forming. It is a process that requires a patience that borders on meditation. Imagine the artisan at work. He begins not with glass, but with mud. He shapes a mixture of clay and dung around a metal rod to form the core, the negative space of the future bottle. This core is the ghost of the vessel. Once dried, this muddy heart is dipped into a cauldron of molten glass, a viscous, honey-like substance usually coloured deep blue or green to mimic precious stones like lapis lazuli or turquoise. This is the hidden logic of early Phoenician glass. It was not designed to be clear. In a world without plastics, the most valuable materials were coloured stones. The Phoenicians were essentially manufacturing synthetic gemstones. They were democratizing luxury, creating objects that looked like they were carved from solid jewel, yet could be produced in series. Once the core is coated in hot glass, the true artistry begins. While the vessel is still glowing and soft, the artisan winds threads of contrasting colours, yellow, white or turquoise, around the body. With a delicate bronze tool, he drags these threads up and down, creating the zigzag and feather patterns that are the hallmark of Phoenician glass. Finally, once the piece has cooled, the clay core is painstakingly scraped out from the inside, leaving a hollow, lightweight vessel of exquisite beauty. These are not large items, they are tiny, palm-sized masterworks, amphoriscos, little jars, and oinochoai, little jugs. And this brings us to the vital role of women in this industry, both as producers and consumers. While men often manned the roaring furnaces, handling the heavy crucibles and enduring the searing heat, the finishing of these vessels required a different touch. Archaeologists suggest that women were likely involved in the cold working stages, polishing the rough edges with abrasive stones and sand until the glass gleamed like water. It was a task of rhythmic, repetitive precision, turning a dull, cooled lump into a shining jewel. But more importantly, women were the drivers of this market. These tiny glass vessels were not for drinking wine. They were the high-end packaging for the cosmetic and pharmaceutical industry. They held perfumed oils, kohl for the eyes, and medicinal unguents. In the ancient Near East, cosmetics were not merely vanity. They were hygiene, medicine, and ritual protection against the sun and insects. The women of the Phoenician aristocracy and the foreign queens who bought these wares were expert chemists in their own right. They understood the properties of oils and herbs. The glass vessel was the final component in a complex domestic science managed by women. When a Sidonian glass flask was sold in Greece or Italy, it was often the contents, the exotic scents blended by female hands in the Levant, that dictated the value. The glass was the beautiful skin. The oil was the soul. The production of glass also reveals a fascinating quirk of Phoenician ingenuity regarding recycling. Long before the modern green movement, the glassworkers of Sidon were the world's first industrial recyclers. They realized that broken glass, or cullet, melts faster than raw sand. It became standard practice to collect shards of broken vessels to jumpstart the melting process in the furnace. Every new batch of glass contained the DNA of the old, a continuous cycle of destruction and rebirth that increased efficiency and saved fuel. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians truly invented glass or merely perfected it. The Egyptians and Mesopotamians had been making glass beads for centuries. However, the scholarly consensus is that the Phoenicians were the first to turn it from a royal curiosity into a tradable commodity. They transformed glass from a magical substance found only in Pharaoh's palace into a product that could be found on the vanity tables of wealthy women across the Mediterranean. The success of this industry, combined with the purple dye and the cedar timber, creates a new problem for the merchant princes of the coast. They are now moving a staggering volume of goods. A single ship might carry 200 amphorae of wine, 50 sacks of grain, a crate of purple-dyed wool, and 300 tiny glass perfume bottles. The old methods of record-keeping, clunky clay tablets written in cuneiform or complex Egyptian hieroglyphs, are becoming a bottleneck. A merchant on a swaying ship deck cannot spend hours impressing wedges into wet clay or drawing elaborate bird symbols to list his inventory. The complexity of the writing systems is strangling the efficiency of the trade. They need something faster. They need a system that can be scratched quickly onto a shard of pottery or a scrap of papyrus. They need a code that is not sacred, but purely functional. In their hunt for profit, the scribes of Byblos and Tyre are about to accidentally invent the most powerful tool in human history. But how do you condense the thousands of sounds of the human voice into just 22 symbols? In the bustling counting houses of Byblos and Tyre, amidst the noise of haggling merchants and the clatter of loading docks, a silent revolution is taking place. It is a revolution not of swords or shields, but of ink and reed. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first look at the world as it was before. For thousands of years, the keys to knowledge were held by a tiny elite. In Egypt, the scribe spent a lifetime mastering hundreds of complex hieroglyphs. In Mesopotamia, the cuneiform writer laboured to press wedge-shaped symbols into wet clay, memorising a dizzying array of logograms where one symbol represented a whole word or idea. Writing was a fortress, guarded by complexity. It was slow, heavy, and exclusory. But the Phoenician merchant standing on the deck of a rolling ship does not have time for complexity. He cannot carry heavy clay tablets that might shatter in a storm. He needs to record a transaction, 50 jars of oil to the merchant in Cyprus, in seconds. He needs a system that is light, portable, and above all easy to learn. Driven by this ruthless pragmatism, the scribes of the Levantine coast strip writing down to its bare bones. They abandon the idea of drawing a picture for every word. Instead, they make a brilliant intuitive leap. They analyse the sounds of the human voice. They realise that all the language is made up of a limited number of distinct sounds. If you assign a symbol to each sound, you can construct any word in the world. They select 22 simple shapes. They are not abstract, they are grounded in the familiar world of the Canaanite farmer and sailor. The first letter is a stylized drawing of an ox's head, Alp. We know it today as A. The second is a sketch of a simple house bet. We know it as B. The third is a throwing stick or camel's hump gamel. We know it as C or G. The fourth is a door dealt. We know it as D. This system, known today as the Phoenician abjad, is the ancestor of almost every alphabet used on Earth today. Hebrew, Arabic, Greek, Latin, Cyrillic, they all trace their lineage back to these 22 scratches made by a busy merchant trying to balance his ledger. This new script is a phonetic system, but with a catch that often confuses modern English speakers. It has no vowels. The reader is expected to supply the vowel sounds based on context. To a Phoenician, the letters KTB could mean he wrote, writing, or book, depending on the sentence. It is a shorthand for the brain, a system designed for speed. The impact of this invention is democratic and profound because the system is so simple, masterable in weeks rather than years. Literacy escapes the temple and the palace. It enters the home. Here we see a subtle but vital shift in the social fabric, particularly for women. In the older, cumbersome systems of writing, female scribes were incredibly rare, but the accessibility of the Phoenician alphabet means that the wives of merchants, who often manage the household accounts and the estate while their husbands are at sea for months, can now keep their own records. We find evidence of this in the humble or private spheres of life. Archaeologists have uncovered personal seals and votive inscriptions suggesting that literacy was not strictly a male profession in the Phoenician world. Women could now label their personal property, write dedications to the goddess Tanit, and perhaps even send messages to absent family members. The alphabet gave a voice to the silent half of the population, handing them a tool to document their existence and their devotion. The beauty of the Phoenician alphabet is its adaptability. It is a viral technology. As the Phoenician ships dock in Greece, Etruria and Spain, they do not just offload purple cloth and glass, they offload the alphabet. The Greeks, seeing the utility of these Phoenician letters, phonetic grammata, adopt them eagerly. However, the Greeks find the lack of vowels frustrating for their language, so they take the leftover Phoenician letters that represent sounds not used in Greek, like the glottal stop of alp, and repurpose them as vowels, creating alpha. There is a deep irony in this legacy. The Phoenicians, a people who left us very little of their own literature, no great epics, no expansive histories written by their own hand, enabled the literature of the rest of the world. Homer's Iliad, the Hebrew Bible, the dialogues of Plato, none of these could have been written down and preserved in their current form without the tool invented by the merchants of Tyre. They built the highway of human thought, even if they didn't drive the cars. Historians still argue fiercely about the exact moment of this invention. Did it happen in Byblos around 1000 BC? Or was it an earlier evolution, derived from the Proto-Sinitic script scratched into the walls of turquoise mines in the Sinai by Canaanite migrant workers centuries earlier? The debate continues, but the functionality remains the undisputed champion. By the 8th century BC, the toolkit of the Phoenician expansion is complete. They have the ships, the curved-hull cedar vessels that can ride the waves. They have the goods, the purple dye, the glass, the wine, and the oil. They have the system, a simple 22-letter code to track every shekel of profit. But the Mediterranean is a crowded pond. The Assyrians are pressing from the east, demanding tribute. The Greeks are waking up and beginning to colonize the Aegean. The Phoenicians need room to breathe. They need safe harbours where they are the masters, not the guests. They look west, past the islands of Greece, past the familiar currents. They look toward the empty coastlines of North Africa and the untamed islands of the central Mediterranean. They are about to transform from simple traders into colonizers. But to build a new world, one must be willing to leave the safety of the old. What drives a family to pack their entire life onto a wooden boat and sail into the setting sun, knowing they might never see home again? The prow of the ship cuts through the dark water, leaving a trail of phosphorescent foam that glows briefly before fading into the blackness of the night sea. It is a lonely, terrifying beauty. We are now far from the protective shadows of Mount Lebanon. We are venturing into the great green, the vast, unpredictable expanse of the Mediterranean. For the ancient mind, the ocean is not merely a physical space, it is a chaotic boundary. It is the realm of Yam, the god of the sea, a deity of untamed power who battles the order of the land. To sail is to trespass, yet the Phoenician captains of the 8th century BC push forward, driven by a logic that outweighs their fear. Back home, the pressure is mounting. The Assyrian war machine is tightening its grip on the coastal cities, demanding tribute in silver and timber that is becoming harder to supply. The population is growing, but the land is not. The only release valve is the horizon. Navigating this void requires more than courage. It requires a celestial map. While most ancient sailors, including the Greeks, hug the coastlines and sail only by day, the Phoenicians dare the night. They possess a secret weapon in the sky. They have identified a faint, unmoving point of light around which the entire heavens seem to revolve. The Greeks steer by the Great Bear, Ursa Major, a large constellation that dips below the horizon as the seasons change, but the Phoenicians steer by the Little Bear, Ursa Minor, specifically the star at the tip of its tail, Polaris. In Antiquity, this constellation is actually known as the Phoenicia, the Phoenician star. Because it never sets and holds its position in the north, it provides a fixed reference point in a shifting world. It allows them to cross open water, cutting straight paths across the sea while their rivals are forced to take the long way around the bays. Their first stepping stone is Cyprus. Visible from the Syrian coast on a clear day, it is the nursery of Phoenician expansion. Here at Cothon they established their first major overseas foothold, but they are not here for the scenery, they are here for the metal that gave the island its name, cuprum, copper. From Cyprus the network expands westward like a spiderweb. The strategy is distinct. Unlike the Romans, who will later march inland to conquer vast territories, the Phoenicians are interested only in the hem. They seek out promontories, offshore islands, and defensible peninsulas, places where a ship can be beached easily and a market can be set up, but which can be defended from the mainland if the locals turn hostile. They move to Rhodes, then to Crete, and then make the great leap across the Ionian Sea to the toe of Italy and the island of Sicily. They settle Panormus, modern Palermo, and Motia. They push further to Sardinia, a rugged island rich in silver and iron. This expansion marks a profound shift in the nature of their voyages. These are no longer just trading runs, they are migrations, and a migration is impossible without women. History often paints the era of colonization as a story of men in boats planting flags. But a colony founded by men alone is just a garrison. It has an expiration date. It is the arrival of Phoenician women that transforms these precarious outposts into permanent cities. Imagine the experience of a woman stepping off the Cedar deck onto the rocky soil of Sardinia or Malta. She has left behind the bustling markets of Tyre, her extended family, and the graves of her ancestors. She brings with her the intangible but vital software of civilization. She carries the seeds of herbs and grains that will not grow in the wild. She carries the household gods, the small clay figurines of Astarte and Bess that turn a strange house into a sanctuary. It is the women who establish the social networks with the local populations. While the men haggle over metal prices, the interaction often happens at the level of the hearth and the market stall, where food, language, and customs are exchanged. In many cases, intermarriage with local indigenous peoples, Elymians in Sicily or Nuragic peoples in Sardinia, cements the Phoenician presence more effectively than any wall. The women become the weavers of this new, hybrid culture, creating a society that is Punic in spirit but locally rooted. By the late 8th century, these settlements are evolving. They are no longer just seasonal stops for sailors to repair their hulls and wait out the winter storms. They are becoming independent city-states. One of the most significant of these early foundations is Utica, on the coast of modern-day Tunisia. Its name, Attic, literally means the old city, a testament to its seniority. Situated at the mouth of the Majerda River, Utica becomes a powerhouse of agricultural export. It is here that we see the genius of the Phoenician middleman economy in full swing. They do not just trade their own goods, they trade everyone else's. They take amber from the Baltic, traded down through Europe, ivory from Africa, silver from Spain, and linen from Egypt. They are the blood vessels of the ancient world, circulating the resources of 3 continents. There is a fascinating, almost ghostly practice described by the historian Herodotus, regarding how these merchants trade with shy or hostile tribes on the African coast beyond the Pillars of Hercules. It is called silent trade. The Carthaginians, or Phoenicians, unload their goods on the beach, light a smoky fire to signal their presence, and then retreat to their ships. The locals emerge, inspect the goods, and lay down an amount of gold they believe is fair. They then retreat. The Phoenicians return. If the gold is sufficient, they take it and leave the goods. If not, they retreat again, waiting for the locals to add more gold. No words are spoken, no blood is spilled. It is a commerce based entirely on trust and the mutual desire for profit, conducted between people who do not share a language or a god. Historians still argue about the extent of this network. Did they really circumnavigate Africa, as Herodotus claims? Did they reach the Azores? The lack of written records leaves these questions open, but the physical evidence, Phoenician pottery shards found in increasingly remote locations suggests that their bravery knew few bounds. However, the network is decentralized. Tyre is the mother, but her children are growing strong and distant. As the grip of the Assyrian Empire tightens around the throat of the homeland in the east, crushing the independence of Tyre and Sidon, the center of gravity begins to shift west. The refugees of the Levant need a new home. They need a capital that is safe from the armies of Mesopotamia. They need a city that can look the world in the eye. And so, the stage is set for the arrival of a legendary figure. She is a queen, a widow, and a refugee. She is fleeing the murderous greed of her own brother, the king of Tyre. Her ships are loaded with treasure and loyal followers. She is sailing toward a small hooked peninsula in North Africa, just a few miles from the old colony of Utica. She is about to make a deal for a piece of land no bigger than an ox hide, and on that land she will build the greatest rival Rome will ever know. It is the year 814 BC. We stand on the dusty, sun-baked shoreline of the Gulf of Tunis, in modern-day Tunisia. The heat here is different from the humid air of Lebanon. It is drier, sharper. Before us lies a calm bay, sheltered from the open sea by a protective hook of land. On the beach, a group of weary exiles is dragging their ships onto the sand. They are not traders looking for a quick profit. They are refugees looking for survival. At their head stands a figure who commands the respect of rough sailors and hardened soldiers alike. She is a woman of royalty, known to history as Elissa, or by the name the local Africans will give her, Dido, the Wanderer. The story of Carthage begins with a family tragedy in Tyre. Elissa was the daughter of the Tyrian king, a woman of sharp intellect and high status. But upon her father's death, her brother, Pygmalion, a man consumed by greed, seized the throne. In a ruthless bid for wealth, he murdered Elissa's husband, the high priest Sychaeus, hoping to confiscate his vast fortune. But he underestimated his sister. Elissa did not weep in silence. She organized a resistance, seizing the ships in the harbour and loading them with her husband's gold, and more importantly, with a cadre of loyal nobles who feared Pygmalion's tyranny. She fled into the night. This was not merely a flight, it was a secession. The best and brightest of Tyre, its aristocracy and its priests, left with her. When they arrived on this North African coast, they were not conquerors. They were petitioners. The land was held by the indigenous Berber tribes, often referred to as Libyans in ancient texts, ruled by a local chieftain. He looked at this band of exhausted seafarers and, perhaps mocking their desperation, offered them a deal. He would grant them only as much land as could be covered by a single ox hide. Here, the hidden logic of the Phoenician mind shines through. A warrior might have drawn a sword. Elissa drew a knife. She took the ox hide and did not lay it on the ground. Instead, she cut it into a single, impossibly thin, continuous strip. By laying this leather cord in a vast semicircle against the coastline, she encompassed a hill. That hill became the Bursa, the citadel of the new city. This story, while legendary, captures a mathematical truth known as the isoperimetric problem, that a circle encloses the largest area for a given perimeter. Whether fact or folklore, it defines the Carthaginian character, a people who survive by outthinking the brute force of the world. They named their new home Kart-Hadasht. In the Semitic tongue of the Phoenicians, it simply means new city. To the Romans, it would become Carthago. The founding of Carthage is unique in ancient history because its primary architect is a woman. Elissa is not a supporting character. She is the equal pillar upon which the state rests. In the early fragile years of the colony, she had to navigate the threats of local warlords and the internal dissent of her own people. The legends say that the local chieftain, Hiarbas, demanded her hand in marriage as the price for the city's safety, a political absorption that would have ended Carthaginian independence before it began. Historians still argue about her ultimate fate. The Roman poet Virgil paints her as a woman destroyed by love for Aeneas, but the older historical traditions tell a different, stronger story. They say she constructed a massive funeral pyre, ostensibly to honour her dead husband, and threw herself into the flames to escape the forced marriage to Hiarbas. In this version, she did not die for a man, she died for the sovereignty of her city. She sacrificed herself to ensure that Carthage would answer to no one. This legacy of female strength is woven into the DNA of the city. Unlike the Greeks, who often sequestered women in the gynoeceum, women's quarters, Carthaginian society appears to have held women in high religious and social regard perhaps echoing the reverence for their foundress. The location Alyssa chose was not accidental. It was a masterstroke of geopolitical strategy. Look at a map of the Mediterranean. The sea is shaped like a chaotic hourglass, pinched in the middle. That pinch point lies between the tip of Sicily and the coast of Tunisia. It is less than 100 miles wide. By settling here, Alyssa placed her city at the toll booth of the ancient world. Any ship wanting to sail from the rampant markets of the East, Egypt, Phoenicia, Greece, to the mineral-rich lands of the West, Spain, Sardinia, had to pass through her front yard. Carthage was destined to be the gatekeeper of the Mediterranean. The early years were hard. The settlers had to transition from a maritime elite into a functioning state. They began to mix with the local North African population, adopting their agricultural techniques and their gods. The result was a new identity, punic. It was a fusion of the sophisticated urban culture of Phoenicia and the rugged, earthy resilience of Africa. The city grew rapidly. The new city soon eclipsed the old city of Utica nearby. The layout of Carthage began to take shape, a chaotic, vibrant metropolis of multi-story apartment blocks, some rising 6 stories high, winding streets and massive temples. But a city built on trade has a critical vulnerability. It is wealthy, and wealth attracts envy. The gold of Alyssa, the profits from the purple dye, the silver from the Spanish mines, it all sat in the warehouses of Carthage, a tempting prize for pirates and rival powers. The new city needed more than just a clever queen and a hill covered by an ox hide. It needed a way to project power. It needed a sanctuary for its most valuable assets, its ships. The Carthaginians realized that a standard harbour open to the sea and to prying eyes was not enough. They needed a machine of war disguised as a port. And so the engineers of Carthage began to dig. They conceived of a structure so advanced, so secretive, that it remains one of the engineering marvels of antiquity. But how do you hide a navy in the middle of a bustling commercial city? If you were a foreign merchant sailing into Carthage in the 4th century BC, your first impression would be one of the intimidation. You would steer your vessel toward the southern part of the city, guided by the towering lighthouse, until you reached the entrance of the port. But this is not an open bay where one can drift in casually. The entrance is a choke point, a narrow opening barely 70 feet wide, guarded on both sides by massive iron chains that can be raised to block access in an instant. Passing through these iron jaws, you enter the first of 2 distinct worlds, the commercial harbour. This rectangular lagoon is a scene of organised chaos. It is the lung of the city, inhaling raw materials and exhaling finished goods. Hundreds of merchant ships jostle for space at the stone quays. The air is thick with the languages of the known world: Greek, Egyptian, Etruscan, Punic. Here, dockworkers, their skin bronzed by the African sun, unload immense blocks of marble, sacks of grain and amphorae of wine. Market women are a vital part of this ecosystem, weaving through the crowds with baskets of bread, dried figs and water. They are the unofficial quartermasters of the port, feeding the army of stevedores and sailors who keep the empire moving. Their sharp voices haggling over prices cut through the heavy drone of rolling barrels. Without these women, the metabolic rate of the harbour would collapse. But as a foreigner, this is as far as you are allowed to go. At the back of this commercial basin, there is another channel, guarded by high double walls. It looks like a tunnel into the heart of the city. If you were to peek through, you would see a site that was classified state secret, a marvel of engineering that the ancient historians Appian and Strabo would later describe with awe. This is the Cothon. The Cothon is the military harbour, the hidden fist of Carthage. Unlike the rectangular merchant port, this basin is a perfect circle. In the centre of the water lies a round island, the Îlot de la Machete, the Admiralty Island, rising like a command post. From a bird's eye view, the entire structure looks like a massive wheel, with the island as the hub and the docks as the spokes. This design is not merely aesthetic, it is the ultimate expression of the hidden logic of the efficiency. The circular shape maximizes the coastline within a confined space. Around the perimeter of the basin, and on the island itself, the Carthaginians have carved out ship sheds, long sloping dry docks roofed with stone. Here, the war fleet does not rot in the water. One of the great enemies of ancient navies is the Teredo navalis, the shipworm, a mollusk that bores into wet wood and turns a strong hull into a sponge. To combat this, the Carthaginian navy pulls its ships out of the water after every patrol. They rest on dry slipways, safe from the worm and ready for maintenance. There are 220 of these sheds. In each one sits a trireme, or a quinquereme, sleek, terrifying warships capable of ramming enemy vessels at ramming speed. The logistics are staggering. The complex functions like a modern aircraft carrier. The timber, the bronze rams, the ropes, and the sails are all stored in warehouses adjacent to each slot. A ship can be launched, rigged, and manned in a matter of hours. The secrecy surrounding this place is absolute. A high double wall separates the commercial harbour from the military one. A merchant selling grain in the outer port cannot see the war preparations happening just a few hundred yards away. Even the Admiral's command tower on the central island is built high enough to overlook the outer harbour and the open sea, allowing him to monitor approaching threats while remaining unseen by the ships below. While the men build the hulls and row the benches, the propulsion of this fleet relies on a softer, lighter material produced in the homes of the city. The navy requires miles of rope and acres of linen sailcloth. This is the domain of the women of Carthage. In the courtyards of the city, a massive, decentralized factory is at work. Women process the flax and hemp, twisting fibers into the heavy cables needed to hoist the sails and anchor the ships. It is said that in times of desperate crisis, when the supplies of hemp ran out, the women of Carthage would cut their long hair and twist it into bowstrings and catapult ropes. While that story belongs to the tragic end of the city, it reflects a truth about its golden age. The fleet was tethered to the domestic labour of its women. Every ship that sailed out of the Cothon carried the handiwork of mothers and daughters in its rigging. The acoustic environment of the Cothon is unique. Because of the enclosed amphitheatre-like shape, the orders of the boatswains and the rhythmic chanting of the rowers echo off the stone walls, creating a focused, intense atmosphere. It is a machine for war, humming with disciplined energy. Historians still argue about the dating of this monumental structure. Was this circular marvel built early in the city's history, or was it a late addition, a desperate upgrade constructed just before the final showdown with Rome? Archaeological evidence suggests the massive stone ship sheds we describe were likely a later development, perhaps 3rd or 2nd century BC, but the concept of a protected inner harbour likely existed much earlier. Regardless of the date, the Cothon represents the pinnacle of Phoenician maritime evolution. They started by dragging logs down a river in Lebanon. Now, they have built an artificial ocean in the centre of a metropolis. They have tamed the sea, boxed it in stone and bent it to their will. But a navy is not built to sit in a shed. These ships are designed to project power, not just in the Mediterranean, but into the terrifying unknown. To the west, past the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, lies the Ocean of Darkness, the Atlantic. The Greeks believed that beyond this point, the world dissolves into chaos and monsters. The Carthaginians, however, know better. They know that the ocean is not the end of the world, it is the beginning of a treasure map. They have heard rumours of islands in the misty north, lands shrouded in fog where the cliffs glitter with a metal that is essential for the creation of bronze. They need tin, and to get it, they are willing to sail off the edge of the known map. But how can a wooden galley, designed for the calm waters of the Mediterranean, survive the crushing swells of the Atlantic Ocean? To understand the courage of the Carthaginian sailor, we must first understand the psychological wall that stood at the edge of his world. Sail west from Carthage, past the rugged coast of North Africa and the familiar ports of Sardinia, and you eventually reach the end of the Mediterranean. Here, the sea narrows into a bottleneck barely 9 miles wide, the Strait of Gibraltar. To the Greeks and Romans, these were the Pillars of Hercules, the absolute limit of the civilized world. Beyond them lay the Oceanus, a river of darkness that encircled the earth. It was a place of chaos, where the laws of nature broke down, inhabited by krakens and endless storms. To sail past the Pillars was to sail off the map, but for the admirals of Carthage this fear was a convenient tool. They knew that fear keeps competitors away. While they whispered terrifying stories of sea monsters and boiling waters to the credulous Greeks, their own captains were quietly slipping through the strait, turning their prows north into the grey, heaving swells of the Atlantic. They were chasing a metal that was becoming the rarest commodity on Earth. The Bronze Age had technically ended, but the world still ran on bronze. It was the metal of armour, of tools, and of statues. To make bronze, you need 2 ingredients, copper and tin. Copper was plentiful, easily found in Cyprus and Spain, but tin was the oil of antiquity, scarce, geographically concentrated, and utterly essential. The known sources in the Near East were exhausted. The overland trade routes from the north were expensive, burdened by the taxes of middlemen tribes in Gaul. Carthage, with its genius for vertical integration, wanted to own the source. They knew of a legendary place, the Cedars, the Tin Islands, rumoured to lie somewhere in the misty, freezing north. Enter Himilco. He is the first Carthaginian explorer whose name has survived the silence of history linked to the northern Atlantic. Sometime in the 5th century BC, Himilco led an expedition that makes the voyage of Columbus look like a pleasure cruise. He did not have a compass, he did not have accurate charts, he had only the sun, the stars, and the hidden logic of the winds. As Himilco's fleet turned north along the coast of modern-day Portugal, the environment shifted violently. The Mediterranean is a relatively calm, tideless bathtub. The Atlantic is a beast. The waves here are longer, heavier, and colder. The tides, a phenomenon almost unknown inside the Mediterranean, could leave a ship stranded on a mudflat or smashed against a reef in a matter of hours. Himilco's own account of this voyage, later quoted by the Roman poet Avienus, describes the terrors of the journey. He speaks of seaweed so thick it holds the ship back like bushes, a likely reference to the Sargasso Sea or dense kelp forests. He speaks of heavy fogs that blanket the water, hiding the horizon for days. While these descriptions might have been exaggerated to scare off rivals, the challenges were real. Survival on such a voyage came down to calories. A ship in the open Atlantic cannot stop to forage. It is a floating desert. The survival of Himilco's crew depended entirely on the preservation technology developed back home, a technology mastered by women. In the kitchens and courtyards of Carthage, women prepared the fuel for these long-range missions. They were the chemists of food preservation. They understood that moisture is the enemy. They developed rigorous methods of salting meat and drying fish until it was as hard as wood, ensuring it would not rot in the damp hold of a ship. They baked the matzah, a twice-baked barley biscuit that is the ancient ancestor of hardtack. It was rock-hard, flavourless, and virtually indestructible, but when soaked in water or wine, it provided the dense carbohydrates needed to row a galley against the Atlantic current. These women, who would never see the grey cliffs of the north, were the silent logistical partners of the exploration. If the biscuit moulded or the meat turned rancid, the expedition failed. The lifeline of the explorer was tied to the hearth of his home. After months of sailing, battling the Bay of Biscay and the rough waters of the English Channel, Himilco's ships finally spotted land. Looming out of the mist were the cliffs of what is likely modern-day Cornwall or Brittany. Here, the Carthaginians encountered a people vastly different from themselves, the Celts. These locals were painted, fierce, and lived in round stone huts, but they possessed the black rocks that Carthage craved, cassiterite, or tin ore. The trade that followed was a clash of cultures. The refined Carthaginian, wearing purple-dyed wool and perfumed with oil, stood on a cold, windswept beach bargaining with a Celtic chieftain draped in furs. They exchanged cheap pottery, salt, and bronze tools for the heavy ore. It was a transaction that spanned epochs, the Iron Age Mediterranean touching the fringe of the prehistoric north. Historians still argue fiercely about the exact identity of the Cedars. Were they the Scilly Isles, the coast of Cornwall, or perhaps islands off the coast of Brittany? The Carthaginians were so successful at keeping their charts secret that even today we cannot be certain of the precise locations they visited. They erased their footprints to protect their monopoly. This policy of secrecy was ruthless. There is a famous story of a Carthaginian captain who, realizing he was being followed by a Roman ship, deliberately steered his own vessel onto a shoal, wrecking it to lure the Romans to their doom. The state of Carthage compensated him for the loss of his ship, a price they were happy to pay to keep the route to the tin hidden. When Himilco returned, his ships riding low in the water, with tons of tin, he brought immense wealth to the city. The furnaces of Carthage roared, mixing the Cornish tin with Cypriot copper to forge the weapons that would defend the empire. But you cannot eat tin, and you cannot drink silver. As Carthage grew from a colony into an imperial capital, its population exploded. The narrow streets were packed with hundreds of thousands of hungry mouths. The city could no longer rely solely on imported grain from Sicily or Sardinia. It was vulnerable to blockades. To become a true superpower, Carthage needed to do something that Phoenicians had historically avoided. They'd always been people of the sea looking outward. Now they were forced to turn around and look inward at the land. They had to conquer the earth beneath their feet. They had to turn the dry, unforgiving soil of North Africa into a garden. And to do that, they needed more than a farmer. They needed a scientist. A man was about to write a book that would change the face of agriculture forever, teaching the world that the soil is not just dirt, but a living system to be engineered. But how do you make the desert bloom when the rain refuses to fall? Turn your back on the glittering sea, the circular harbour, and the salt spray of the coast. Walk inland, away from the noise of the city, and you enter a world that feels surprisingly serene, almost like a garden paradise. This is the Megara, the vast agricultural hinterland that encircles Carthage. To the Roman invaders who would later march through these lands, the sight was shocking. They expected to find barbarian huts and wild scrubland. Instead, they found a landscape of geometric perfection. Mile after mile of manicured olive groves, vineyards laced with irrigation channels, and orchards heavy with figs, pomegranates, and almonds. The Carthaginians, famous as masters of the sea, were secretly the most advanced farmers in the Mediterranean. This transformation of the North African dust into a lush breadbasket was not an accident of nature. It was the result of a rigorous intellectual project led by a man whose name became synonymous with the land, Mago. History remembers Mago not as a general or a king, but as a scientist. He was a Carthaginian aristocrat who retired from public life to study the soil. He approached farming with the same ruthless efficiency that his countrymen applied to trade. He did not view agriculture as a peasant's burden, but as a complex biological machine that could be optimized. He wrote a colossal encyclopedia of agriculture, 28 volumes in total. It was so comprehensive, so undeniably brilliant, that when the Romans eventually burned Carthage to the ground in 146 BC, this set of scrolls was the only thing they saved from the library. The Roman Senate, usually dismissive of barbarian literature, ordered it to be translated immediately into Latin. It became the textbook for Roman farming for centuries. Mago's genius lay in his hidden logic of specialization. He taught that a farm should not just be a patch of land for survival, it should be a factory for profit. He advised landowners to specialize in cash crops, olives and grapes, rather than just subsistence grain. He introduced complex systems of grafting trees to improve fruit quality and detailed methods for composting animal manure to revive exhausted soil. One of his most famous and perhaps harshest pieces of advice was directed at the prospective gentleman farmer. If you buy a farm, sell your house in the city. Mago believed that the land required the master's constant eye. Absentee landlords, he argued, produced poor crops. While Mago wrote the theory, the practical reality of these estates relied heavily on the female half of the workforce. On a large Carthaginian plantation, the division of labour was distinct. The men often did the heavy breaking of the earth, the ploughing and the pruning. But the transformation of raw produce into tradable wealth was largely the domain of women. Consider the olive. Plucked from the tree, it is bitter and inedible. It requires a chemical process to become valuable. Women managed the curing vats, soaking the olives in brine to leach out the bitterness. More importantly, they oversaw the production of oil, the liquid gold of antiquity. This was not just cooking oil, it was fuel for lamps, soap for washing, and a base for perfumes. The consistency and clarity of the oil depended on the timing of the press and the filtering, tasks that required a watchful, experienced eye. Similarly, in the vineyards, while men trod the grapes, women were often the keepers of the fermentation process. They understood the delicate balance of yeast and sugar, adding resin or herbs to preserve the vintage. They were the chemists of the estate. Mago also devoted significant sections of his work to the care of livestock, particularly the breeding of horses and cattle. Here too, there is a quieter domestic layer to the story. The production of cheese and wool, vital for the estate's self-sufficiency, was under the purview of the women. They managed the dairy sheds and the shearing, turning perishable milk into durable cheese that could be stored or sold in the city markets. The agricultural success of Carthage created a unique social structure. The countryside was dotted with beautiful villas, the country homes of the urban elite. These were not fortresses, but pleasant retreats with courtyards, fountains, and mosaic floors. It suggests a period of long, deep peace in the African interior, where the wealthy felt safe enough to live outside the city walls. However, this agricultural machine had a darker fuel. Historians still argue about the extent to which Carthaginian agriculture relied on slave labour versus free peasant labour. The evidence suggests that as the estates grew larger, following Mago's industrial model, the reliance on enslaved people increased. These workers, often captured in wars or bought from the interior, were the invisible energy source behind the blooming orchards. It is a grim paradox that the scientific enlightenment of Mago was built on the backs of human chattel, yet there is a specific crop that tells us something about the Carthaginian soul, the pomegranate. The Romans called it the Punic apple, Malum punicum. It was a symbol of fertility and abundance, bursting with seeds. The Carthaginians planted it everywhere. It was a resilient tree capable of surviving the heat, yet yielding a fruit that was both food and drink. It reflected their own nature. Tough skin on the outside, rich and complex on the inside. Mago's influence extended even to the smallest creatures. He wrote about beekeeping, recognizing that the health of the orchard depended on the pollinator. The production of honey and beeswax was another industry managed within the household, often by women, providing the only source of sweetener in a world without sugar. By the 4th century BCE, the science of the soil had made Carthage the wealthiest city in the world. They were not just traders, they were producers. They controlled the entire supply chain, from the root in the ground to the ship in the harbour. But despite this mastery over nature, despite the irrigation canals that tamed the drought and the breakwaters that tamed the sea, the Carthaginians lived with a deep gnawing anxiety. They believed that their prosperity was not merely a result of hard work, but a conditional gift from the gods. They believed that the forces of the universe were volatile, jealous, and hungry. And to keep these forces happy, to ensure that the rain fell and the ships returned, they believed that a price had to be paid. A price so high, so terrible that it has stained their reputation for 2,000 years. We must now leave the sunny orchards of Mago and enter the shadowed sanctuary of the Tophet, where the smoke of sacrifice rises to meet the moon. The sun sets over the orderly orchards of Mago, and a different kind of reality takes hold of Carthage. As the vibrant colours of the harbour fade into the blue-grey of twilight, the city turns its eyes toward the sky. We are moving now from the science of the soil to the shadows of the spirit. We are entering the sanctuary of the Tophet. To the modern mind, religion is often a matter of private belief or moral guidance. But to the Carthaginian, religion is a contract. It is a high-stakes negotiation with forces that are invisible, powerful, and potentially destructive. The logic is terrifyingly simple. The gods give the rain, the harvest, and the victory in war. In return, they demand a share of the profit. And sometimes they demand a payment that tears the human heart in two. Walking into the sacred precinct of the Tophet of Salambo, under the light of the moon, you do not see a towering temple with a roof. This is an open-air sanctuary, a garden of stone markers planted in the earth like strange crops. Thousands of small stelae, upright stone slabs, stand in rows, silent witnesses to centuries of devotion. The presiding power here is a duality. There is Baal Hammon, the lord of the brazier, an ancient patriarchal sky god associated with the sun and the vegetative cycle. He is the heavy, stern father figure of the pantheon. But by the 5th century BC, he is joined, and often eclipsed, by a female deity who becomes the true face of Carthage. Her name is Tanit. She is unique to the Western Mediterranean. While the Phoenicians of the homeland worshipped Astarte, the Carthaginians elevated Tanit to the supreme position. She is often titled Tanit Penna Baal, Tanit Face of Baal. This title suggests that she is the accessible presence of the divine, the mediator who stands between the terrifying power of the sky god and the people of the city. Her symbol is everywhere, a triangle topped by a horizontal bar and a circle. It looks like a stylized figure of a woman in a long dress, arms raised in blessing or prayer. You find it on gravestones, on mosaic floors, and stamped onto pottery. It is the logo of the empire. Tanit is a mother goddess, a guardian of fertility, and the protector of the city. She is not a soft, passive figure. She is a goddess of power. And it is here, in the shadow of her symbol, that the most controversial and haunting chapter of Carthaginian history is written. We must address the question that has hung over this civilization for 2,000 years. Did they sacrifice their children? The Greek and Roman historians, Plutarch, Diodorus, Cleitarchos, tell us horrific stories. They describe bronze statues of Baal with sloping arms, where infants were placed to roll down into a pit of fire. They write of drums beating loudly to drown out the cries of the parents. For centuries, modern historians dismissed these accounts as enemy propaganda, the ancient equivalent of fake news invented by Rome to justify the destruction of a barbaric rival. But in the last century, archaeology has forced us to confront a darker possibility. Excavations in the Tophet have uncovered urns, containing the cremated bones of thousands of infants and young animals. The inscriptions on the stelae do not speak of grief or death. They speak of giving. They use the word mulk, meaning a votive offering. To the Lady Tanit and the Lord Baal Hammon, that he may hear my voice and bless me. This suggests that the sacrifice was real, but we must be careful not to view this through the lens of cruelty. The hidden logic here is one of agonizing value. You do not offer the gods something you do not care about. You offer them the most precious thing you possess. In moments of existential crisis, a plague, a siege, or a drought, the community believed that only the ultimate gift could save the whole. It was a calculus of survival, the life of the one for the salvation of the many. In this grim theatre, the role of women is profoundly complex. If we view Tanit as the Great Mother, then the mothers of Carthage are her earthly counterparts. The Roman sources claim that parents were forbidden to weep during the ritual, that they had to watch the offering with dry eyes to ensure the validity of the gift. Imagine the strength of will required of a mother in that moment. Standing in the flickering torchlight, she is not a passive victim. She is an active participant in a cosmic transaction. She is bearing a burden that is almost incomprehensible to us. She is the equal pillar of the state not just in joy, but in sorrow. She carries the emotional weight of the city's survival on her shoulders. However, there is an ongoing, spirited, scholarly debate that offers a different, softer interpretation. Some modern researchers analyse the bone ashes and argue that many of these infants were stillborn, or died of natural causes shortly after birth. In this view, the Tophet is not a slaughterhouse, but a special cemetery for the deepest grief. It is a place where parents return their short-lived children to the care of Tanit, hoping that the goddess would grant them a replacement in the future. If this is true, then the Tophet is not a place of fear, but of female solace, a sanctuary where mothers could mourn the children that the harsh ancient world took from them too soon. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a mixture of ritual sacrifice in times of terror and pious burial in times of peace. Regardless of the method, the atmosphere of Carthaginian religion is one of intense personal connection. Unlike the Romans, who had priests perform rituals while the public watched from a distance, the Carthaginians seem to have had a direct line to their gods. The inscriptions are personal, because he heard my voice. There are other, less somber rituals that bind the society together. We know of feasts and processions where families gathered to share food in the presence of the divine. Incense, that expensive resin from the east, would billow through the streets, creating a sensory bridge between the earth and the sky. This spiritual intensity acts as the glue for the diverse population of the city. Carthage is a melting pot of Phoenicians, Berbers, Greeks, and Numidians. What makes them Carthaginian is not just their blood, but their shared reverence for Tanit. She is the unifying mother. When a sailor from Carthage is in a storm off the coast of Spain, he does not call out to the local gods. He calls out to the Lady of the Moon who watches over the circular harbour. The priesthood that manages these rituals is a powerful elite, often clean-shaven and dressed in simple white linen, distinct from the heavily bearded populations of the Near East. And here too, women hold positions of influence. We have evidence of priestesses, women of high status who served the temples of Tanit and Astarte. These were not secluded mystics. They were public figures, involved in the management of the temple's vast wealth and estates. As the moon sets and the smoke clears from the Tophet, the city sleeps with a heavy conscience but a secure spirit. They have paid the insurance premium on their prosperity. They believe they have secured another year of rain for Magos fields and safe winds for the ships. But a city is not held together only by fear of the gods. It is held together by the daily mundane weaving of relationships, business spells, deals, and marriages. While the priests manage the heavens, there is another force managing the earth. There is a silent infrastructure of power that operates behind the closed doors of the great villas and the bustling markets. It is time to look away from the stone idols and look at the living pillars of this society. We must meet the women who run the empire while the men are at sea. The sun rises over the residential quarter of Carthage, the Bursa Hill. The streets here are narrow and winding, lined with tall, whitewashed houses that turn a blank face to the public but open inward onto cool, shaded courtyards. It is within these walls that the true engine of Carthaginian stability hums. We have spoken of sailors, soldiers, and priests, but now we must speak of the silent pillars, the women of the Punic elite. In the ancient world, trade is not just about moving goods, it is about trust. A merchant might be gone for 2, maybe 3 years on a voyage to the Tin Islands or the Ivory Coast? Who keeps the business alive while he is gone? Who manages the estates, negotiates the local contracts, and ensures the family wealth is not squandered? In Athens, a woman of status is largely confined to the gyneceum, hidden away and legally powerless. In Rome, she is respected as a matrona, but legally subject to the absolute authority of her father or husband. But in Carthage, the evidence suggests a different reality, a society where women possess a unique agency born of necessity. Because the men are so often absent, the women become the de facto CEOs of the family enterprise. Walk into one of these high-walled villas. The central courtyard is a hub of activity. Here, the lady of the house does not merely spin wool, she manages a complex domestic economy. We have found Punic funerary inscriptions that list women with titles and genealogies as long and proud as any man's. They trace their lineage back to the founders of the city, asserting their own place in the social hierarchy. This is the hidden logic of a maritime republic. When the husbands are at sea, the wives must be the anchors. A legal contract found in a Carthaginian settlement reveals women buying and selling property, owning slaves and engaging in business deals independently. They are not passive assets to be traded in marriage. They are active partners in the accumulation of wealth. Their influence extends to the most vital glue of ancient society, the arranged marriage. In a culture built on trade alliances, a marriage is a merger. The women of the aristocracy are the brokers of these alliances. They weave the social net that binds the great families, the Barcids, the Magonids, the Hanos, together. Through a complex web of cousins and in-laws, they ensure that political rivalry does not devolve into civil war. They are the diplomats of the dining room. This role is visually celebrated in Carthaginian art. The Lady of Galera, a Phoenician alabaster figurine found in Spain, depicts a seated woman flanked by sphinxes, holding a bowl. She radiates a calm, regal authority. She is not a fertility fetish, she is a matriarch, a figure of governance and religious power. Her clothing is rich, her posture upright. She represents the woman who stays behind, the one who holds the keys. There is also a fascinating aesthetic to these women. We know they took great care in their appearance, using the very products their city exported. They used Egyptian kohl to outline their eyes, red ochre for their lips, and scented oils from the workshops of Tyre. But this was not mere vanity. In a society where wealth was status, a woman's presentation was a public statement of her family's credit rating. To walk through the market dripping in gold jewellery and wrapped in Tyrian purple was to signal to the entire city, "Our ships have returned, our credit is good." However, their lives are not just about business and beauty, they are the guardians of memory. In a culture that writes on perishable papyrus and wax, oral tradition is paramount. It is the mothers who teach the children the stories of Alyssa, the history of the ancestors, and the complex rituals of Tanit. They are the hard drives of the culture, storing the software of Punic identity and installing it in the next generation. This matriarchal strength faces a unique test in the realm of religion. We have spoken of the Tophet, but we must consider the mother's perspective again. If the sacrifice of a child is indeed a reality, it implies a terrifying equality. The burden of the vow falls on the mother as much as the father. Her consent, her voice mentioned in the inscriptions, is required. This dark duty elevates her status in a grim way. She is recognized as having the spiritual authority to give life to the gods. Furthermore, we see evidence of mixed marriages being a strategic tool of the state, with women at the forefront. When Carthage expands into North Africa and Spain, it is often the daughters of Carthage who marry local Numidian princes or Iberian chieftains to cement treaties. These women become cultural ambassadors, living in foreign courts, introducing Punic customs, language, and gods to the barbarian interior. They are the unsung colonizers, conquering not with swords but with influence. Yet despite their power, they remain largely nameless in the Greek and Roman histories. The foreign male historians were not interested in the domestic managers of their enemy. They saw only the generals. But if we look closely at the resilience of Carthage, how it survived plague, mercenary revolts and devastating wars, we see the hand of its women. When the state treasury was empty, it was the jewellery of the women that often refilled it. When the city was under siege, it was the women who rationed the food and maintained order in the streets. They were the logistical backbone of the defence. As the 4th century ends, this stable, female-managed domestic sphere provides the foundation for a new kind of power. The wealth generated by the trade and the estates allows Carthage to do something no other city-state can afford to do on such a scale. Most ancient cities rely on citizen militias, farmers who pick up a spear for the summer and go home for the harvest. But Carthage is too rich to risk its own citizens in every skirmish. It has the money to outsource the violence. It begins to build a military machine that is as cosmopolitan and varied as its marketplace. They are about to create the most terrifying corporate army the world has ever seen. A force of professionals bought with silver, led by a core of iron-willed citizens. But can you trust an army that fights for a paycheck rather than a flag? Listen closely to the sound of a Carthaginian army on the march. It does not sound like the rhythmic singular tramp of a Roman legion, nor the unified chant of a Greek phalanx. It sounds like the Tower of Babel. It is a cacophony of guttural Celtic roars, sharp Iberian commands, the rhythmic drumming of Numidian hooves, and the whistle of Balearic stones. This is not a national army. It is a multinational corporation of violence, paid for by the deepest pockets in the Mediterranean. By the 4th century BC, Carthage has perfected a method of warfare that is entirely unique in the ancient world. Most city-states view military service as a duty of citizenship. If you live in the city, you die for the city. But the hidden logic of Carthage is economic. They have calculated the value of a human life. A Carthaginian citizen is a merchant, a navigator, a master farmer, or a skilled artisan. He generates immense tax revenue. To send him to die in a muddy ditch in Sicily is, simply put, bad business. So they outsource the dying. They open their treasury doors and buy the best specialists the world has to offer. From the Balearic Islands, they hire slingers, men who have trained since childhood to knock a bird out of the sky with a smooth river stone. These stones, whirring through the air like bullets, can shatter a helmet or break a shield arm at 100 paces. From the grassy plains of North Africa, they recruit the Numidians. These are the finest light cavalry in history. They ride without saddles or bridles, guiding their horses with nothing but a rope around the neck and the pressure of their knees. They are the ghosts of the battlefield, striking, retreating, and striking again before the enemy can turn. From Spain they bring the Iberians and Celtiberians, grim men in white tunics bordered with purple, wielding the falcata. This curved iron sword is top-heavy, designed to split a shield and the man behind it in a single blow. And from the north they hire the Gauls, towering warriors who fight half-naked, relying on ferocity and massive longswords. To command this chaotic polyglot force requires a special kind of genius. The Carthaginian general cannot rely on patriotism. He cannot give a rousing speech about defending the fatherland, because half his army doesn't speak Punic and none of them care about Carthage. He must lead through charisma, gold and fear. He must be a CEO of war. But an army is not just men with spears. It is a travelling city. And here, in the dust of the baggage train, we find the invisible infrastructure that keeps this mercenary machine running. These soldiers do not travel alone. They bring their wives and children. The camp of a Carthaginian mercenary army is a bustle of female activity. These women, hailing from Gaul, Spain and Africa, are the logistics corps. When the army halts, it is the women who forage for firewood, cook the meals that fuel the fighters, and mend the tunics torn in battle. They are the field medics, tending to sword cuts and arrow wounds with herbal poultices. Their presence is also a subtle form of control. A mercenary might desert if he is alone, but he will not abandon his wife and children in hostile territory. The Carthaginian generals tolerate, and perhaps even encourage, this vast following because it stabilizes the volatile loyalty of the hired guns. The women of the camp are the anchors of the army. However, there is one unit in this force that is not bought. In the centre of the battle line, standing like a wall of white and gold, is the Hieros Lokos, the sacred band. These are not mercenaries. These are the sons of Carthage. They are a heavy infantry phalanx composed of 2,500 men from the wealthiest and most powerful families of the city. They are the future senators, judges, and merchant princes. They fight in magnificent armour, often polished to a mirror sheen, carrying large white shields. The existence of the sacred band reveals the deep insecurity at the heart of the Carthaginian state. They know that mercenaries can be bribed. They know that when the gold runs out, the loyalty ends. So they keep this elite unit as the fail-safe. They are the Praetorian Guard of the Constitution, the guarantee that if the mercenaries break, the citizens will stand. The emotional weight of this unit on the city is crushing. When a mercenary dies, it is a line item in a ledger. When a soldier of the sacred band dies, the lights go out in a mansion on the Bursa Hill. we see the role of the elite women, the mothers and wives of these young men, in the rituals of their departure. It is said that the mothers of the sacred band would personally hand the shield to their sons. This was not a Spartan come back with it or on it command, it was a religious transfer of honour. These women, who managed the great estates and wove the alliances of the city, were sending their own flesh and blood to protect the wealth they helped create. There is a tragic majesty to the sacred band. They were renowned for their discipline and their refusal to retreat. They fought not for pay, but for the favour of Baal and Tanit. They drank wine from gold cups before battle, a ritual communion that bound them together in life and death. But relying on such a small, precious elite has a terrible flaw. You cannot replace them. This flaw is brutally exposed in 341 BC at the Battle of the Cramissus in Sicily. The Carthaginian army, led by the sacred band, is caught in a violent storm while crossing a river. They are ambushed by a smaller Greek army led by Timoleon. The rain turns the ground to mud, neutralizing the heavy armor of the Carthaginians. The hail beats in their faces. The sacred band fights with desperate courage. Even when the mercenaries flee, the sons of Carthage stand their ground. They fight until the river runs red, but they are annihilated. Almost the entire unit is wiped out. The news hits Carthage like a physical blow. The city is plunged into mourning. In a single afternoon, an entire generation of the aristocracy has been erased. The grief of the mothers and widows is so profound that the city changes its laws. They decide never to risk their best blood in such numbers again. The sacred band is reformed, but it is never the same. From now on, Carthage will lean even heavier on the checkbook and the foreign sword. Historians still argue about the exact composition and equipment of the sacred band. Were they modelled on the Theban sacred band? Did they fight with Greek spears or traditional Semitic weapons? But the archaeological silence speaks volumes. We find few graves because their bodies were often lost in the mud of foreign fields. This military pivot sets the stage for the rest of Carthaginian history. They become a superpower that tries to fight wars without bleeding. They try to solve the problem of violence with the logic of the marketplace. It works against the disorganized tribes of Africa and Spain. It works against the pirates. But the Mediterranean is shrinking. The Greeks are planting their own colonies in the west, bringing with them a different philosophy of war, one of citizen soldiers fighting for liberty, not gold. And to the north, a wolf is waking up in Italy. The Carthaginians are masters of the deal, but they are about to learn that there are some things you cannot buy. They are entering a collision course with a culture that values glory more than profit. But before the Roman wolf arrives, the immediate threat comes from the Greeks, the other great sailors of the wine-dark sea. Two merchant empires are expanding into the same space, and the sea is not big enough for both of them. How does a rivalry over olive oil and silver turn the blue waters of the Mediterranean into a graveyard of triremes? The Mediterranean sun beats down on the triangular island of Sicily, illuminating a landscape that is destined to be the cockpit of the ancient world. It is the 5th century BC. To the east, the marble temples of the Greek colonists, the Magna Graecia, gleam on the hilltops of Syracuse and Agrigento. To the west, the grim fortress-like ports of the Carthaginian eparchy dominate the coastline. The sea between them is not merely water, it is a contested border. For centuries, the Phoenicians and the Greeks have circled each other, like two predators in a shrinking cage. They are the two great merchant peoples of antiquity. Both are brilliant sailors, both are colonizers, and both are hungry for the same resources, but their philosophies are fundamentally different. The Greek world is a collection of squabbling city-states, loud with democracy and tyranny, preaching freedom of the seas. They want open markets. The Carthaginian world is a silent, unified oligarchy that believes in mare clausum, the closed sea. Their logic is absolute. The Western Mediterranean is Punic property. Any foreign ship found sailing towards Sardinia, or the Pillars of Hercules without permission, is not a trader. It is a trespasser. And the penalty for trespassing is to be rammed and sunk. This is not a Cold War. It is a hot war that boils over for centuries. The defining moment of this clash occurs not on land, but on the waves, off the coast of Corsica, around 535 BC. It is known as the Battle of Alalia. Here, the hidden logic of Carthaginian diplomacy comes into play. Realizing that the Greek pirate settlers are becoming too dangerous, Carthage teams up with their old trading partners, the Etruscans of Italy. It is a rare moment of cooperation to crush a common pest. Imagine the scene. a churning mess of 120 ships. These are not galleons trading broadsides, they are guided missiles. The primary weapon is the bronze ram at the waterline. The goal is to smash the enemy's oars, crippling the ship, or to punch a hole in the hull and back away, letting the ocean do the rest. The water is thick with wreckage and drowning men. Historians still argue about the outcome of Alelia. The Greek historian Herodotus calls it a Cadmean victory, a victory so costly it feels like a defeat. The Greeks survived, but they were so battered that they abandoned their colony. Carthage and Etruria effectively drew a line in the water. The Greeks were forced to stay in the east. The west belonged to Carthage. But on the island of Sicily, the war never really stops. It is a pendulum of sieges and massacres, and it is here, amidst the smoke of burning cities, that we see a fascinating cultural transformation driven by women. In 396 BC, a Carthaginian general named Himilco, not the explorer, is besieging the Greek city of Syracuse. In his arrogance, he allows his troops to plunder the sanctuary of Demeter and Kore, the revered Greek goddesses of grain and the underworld. Almost immediately, a plague sweeps through the Carthaginian camp. Thousands die. Himilco sees this not as a germ, but as a judgment. He has offended the mothers of the earth. When the shattered army returns to Carthage, the city is in a panic. To appease the angry foreign deities, the Carthaginian Senate does something extraordinary. They officially import the cult of Demeter and Kore. This moment marks a significant shift for the women of Carthage. To worship these Greek goddesses properly, they need Greek rituals. The city appoints its most prominent women to lead this new priesthood. We see Punic women, who grew up worshipping Tanit, now donning the robes of Demeter, learning the Greek mysteries of the harvest and the afterlife. It is a profound irony. The war that was meant to destroy Greek influence actually brings Greek culture into the heart of the Carthaginian sanctuary. The women become the bridge between the two civilizations. Through their rituals, they blend the stern, fiery energy of the Punic religion with the agricultural, cyclical mysticism of the Greeks. They create a spiritual hybridity that softens the hard edges of the merchant state. This era also reveals the darker side of the rivalry, the fate of women as the currency of war. When a Greek city falls to Carthage, or a Punic city falls to a tyrant like Agathocles or Dionysius, the women are the first to pay the price. They are enslaved by the thousands. We must acknowledge the silent trauma of this period. Generations of women uprooted, forced to learn the language of their captors, raising children who are half Greek, half Carthaginian. Yet even in this chaos, trade continues. It is one of the paradoxes of the ancient Mediterranean. A Carthaginian merchant might be funding a war against Syracuse in the morning and selling purple dye to a Syracusan buyer in the afternoon. Money often speaks louder than swords. We find evidence of this in the fringe artifacts, Greek pottery found in Carthaginian tombs, and Punic glass found in Greek temples. The women of the elite, regardless of the war, still demanded the finest goods. A noblewoman in Carthage wanted her Attic black figure vases. A noblewoman in Athens wanted her Tyrian perfume. The demands of the domestic sphere created a current of commerce that flowed underneath the turbulence of the war. By the early 3rd century BC, the Carthaginians seem to have won the long game. The Greek power in the west is fading. Athens is a shadow of its former self. The great Hellenistic kingdoms are focused on the east. Carthage stands as the undisputed master of the western Mediterranean. Her harbour is full, her treasury is overflowing, and her treaties are respected. They look at the map and see no serious threats. They have contained the Greeks. The Etruscans are in decline. The tribes of Spain and Africa are managed by gold and mercenaries. But in their focus on the old rival, the Greeks, they have missed the new danger rising in their own backyard. Across the narrow straits of Messina, on the Italian mainland, a new power has devoured the Etruscans and the Samnites. They are a people who do not care about trade monopolies or purple dye. They care only about land and obedience. The wolf is at the door, and unlike the Greeks, who fought for profit and glory, these new enemies fight for total annihilation. The golden age of Carthage is about to end, not with a whimper, but with the thunder of 1,000 legions. It is the year 264 BC. If we could freeze time at this precise moment hovering above the North African coast, we would see Carthage at its absolute zenith. The city below is a sprawling masterpiece of urban planning, home to perhaps 500,000 souls. It is the New York of the ancient world, a cosmopolitan melting pot where the wealth of 3 continents converges. From the high citadel of the Bursa, the view is breathtaking. To the south, the circular naval harbour sits like a coiled spring as the 220 warships dry and ready in their sheds. To the north, the meticulously irrigated estates of the Megara stretch out like a green quilt, feeding the teeming population. In the markets, the noise is deafening, a babble of Punic, Greek, Berber, and Iberian voices haggling over ivory, silver, and the ubiquitous purple cloth. The hidden logic of this empire seems flawless. They have built a system where commerce is the state religion and war is merely a business expense. They have outsourced their defence to mercenaries and their agriculture to the experts. They have created a society that rewards ingenuity, where a man of humble birth can rise to become a suffet, a magistrate, through trade, and where a woman can hold the keys to a vast family fortune. The women of Carthage, in this twilight of the Golden Age, are living in a period of unprecedented sophistication. They are the consumers of the finest Hellenistic art. Their homes are decorated with mosaics that rival those of Alexandria. They wear jewellery of intricate gold filigree, fashioned by artisans who have inherited centuries of Phoenician craftsmanship. In the cool tiled courtyards of the city, these women are raising the generation that will fight the Punic Wars. They are the mothers of the Barcids, Hannibal, Hasdrubal, Margot. They are teaching their children the history of Alyssa and the pride of the lion. They do not know yet that they are raising their sons for a slaughter that will change history. They believe that the system works. They believe that if a war starts, it can be settled with a treaty and an indemnity, just like a business deal gone wrong. But they are suffering from a fatal catastrophic blindness. They look across the water and see Rome as just another Italian tribe, perhaps a bit more aggressive than the Samnites, but ultimately rational. They assume that Rome, like Carthage, fights for profit. They do not understand that they are facing a completely different organism. Rome does not fight for profit. Rome fights for dominance. Rome does not sign treaties to end wars, it signs treaties to pause them until it can win. The Carthaginians are playing chess, the Romans are boxing. The spark that burns down the world is lit by a trivial event. A group of mercenaries in Messina, on the tip of Sicily, asks for help. Carthage sends a small garrison, a routine police action, to maintain stability in their sphere of influence. But Rome also answers the call. When the Roman legions cross the narrow Strait of Messina on makeshift rafts, the Golden Age of Carthage effectively ends. The closed sea is breached. The centuries of slow, patient accumulation of wealth, the careful tending of the olive trees, the brave voyages to the Tin Islands, all of it is about to be wagered on the table of war. The tragedy of this moment is the silence. The people in the streets of Carthage go about their day, buying bread and selling oil, unaware that the doomsday clock has started ticking. The priests in the Tophet offer their sacrifices, believing the gods are satisfied. The admirals in the Cothon inspect the hulls, confident that no landlubber army can challenge the masters of the sea. But the history of the Phoenicians has always been one of resilience, of rising from the ashes. They survived the collapse of the Bronze Age, they survived the Assyrians, they survived the Babylonians and the Greeks. They are the survivors of the ancient world. As the sun sets on this era, casting long shadows over the white walls of the city, we leave them here, suspended in their last moment of peace. The purple dye is still drying on the racks, the glass furnaces of Sidon are still burning, the Cedar ships are still riding the swell of the Atlantic. It is a world of immense beauty and hidden logic, a civilization that taught humanity how to trade, how to write, and how to sail into the dark. They were the pioneers of the horizon, and though their city will eventually fall, their spirit, the spirit of the explorer, the merchant, and the builder, remains woven into the fabric of our world. And so our long voyage across the wine-dark sea comes to a gentle close. We have travelled far together, drifting on the currents of time from the misty cedar-covered slopes of Mount Lebanon to the glittering, sun-drenched harbour of Carthage. We have stood with the woodcutters in the high silence of the mountains, smelling the resin that built the temples of the world. We have watched the shipwrights bend the cedar into curved hulls, teaching wood to float and men to fly. We have seen the purple dye stain the hands of the workers, creating a colour that would define royalty for 1,000 years. We have marvelled at the patience of the glassblowers of Sidon, trapping the light of the sun in small precious vessels. We have traced the simple scratches of the alphabet, the quiet invention that gave a voice to history and a memory to mankind. We have felt the salt spray on our faces as we sailed with the brave captains past the Pillars of Hercules into the great unknown of the Atlantic, chasing the mysteries of the north. We have walked the orderly rows of Mago's orchards, where the desert was taught to bloom, and we have stood in the shadows of the Tophet, understanding the heavy price of survival. We have honoured the silent strength of the women, the queens, the mothers, the weavers, and the priestesses, who held the weight of this empire on their shoulders, weaving the social fabric that was stronger than any stone wall. Now, the busy noise of the market fades away. The shouting of the sailors dies down to a whisper. The oars stop their rhythmic beating, and the ships glide silently into the calm waters of the bay. The fires in the glass furnaces dim to a soft, warming glow. The history of Carthage and Phoenicia is not just a story of the past, it is a memory of human endurance, of our eternal desire to explore, to build, and to connect with one another across the vastness of the sea. Let the waves wash over the sands of time, smoothing out the footprints of the past. The stars that guided Himilco and Alyssa still shine above us tonight, fixed and eternal. The sea is calm, the journey is done, sweet dreams.